All right, students, welcome back to another Star Tutors live stream. I hope you guys are doing well. If you haven't been with us before, I am Chase. I will be your guide and your host, taking you through this live lesson today. When you get to when you start to hear my voice, whether you're part of the live stream, live lesson, or if you can't join us for the live lesson, but you're watching the recorded video, please give us a thumbs up below the video. Make sure that you subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And turn on all notifications so that you get updates for our next videos. Guys, for the first time, for those that are doing a live stream, we are making this a members-only chat. In addition to being able to participate and ask your own questions in the live stream. And by the way, all questions that aren't answered during the live stream can always be commented below the video for any of the recorded video. But if you're interested in joining our membership program, you can do that by clicking the join button, which will allow you to answer questions or ask questions during these Q&As. In addition to accessing all of our premium content, so all the content that you've already seen on the YouTube channel, we have made an exclusive playlist for all channel members, which has received some very positive responses from the members so far. So if you're interested in checking that out, SAT exclusive playlist. If you guys are interested in that, you can check out that playlist. But in any case, guys, again, that'll get you premium content. The silver membership is $3 a month, so if you feel like that's worth it to ask questions and to participate during the live streams and have the perks of the premium content, then please click that join button below. But once again, all of these videos are always free. So if you don't feel like participating in that way, you can always just ask questions in that, or you can always watch the video and follow along. I've provided links as well in the live stream as well as below the video for those that are going to watch the recording, and you can follow along with all of the digital test forms. So watching the video is always free, but if you are interested in participating with the Q&A and again accessing that premium content, you can click that join button below the video, and we'd love to see you. If nothing else, please make sure you subscribe to the channel. Subscribing is completely free if you turn on all notifications, especially if you like what you see today. If you turn on all notifications, you'll always get access or you'll always get updates about when we're going to do another live stream. So hopefully that takes care of that. Trying to think if there's anything else. Once again today, guys, we're going to be going over the SAT full comprehensive review on all 4 sections of the exam. So hopefully you guys are able to follow along. If you're taking the test very soon, as of this video, the next test form is in December. So if you guys are taking the national or international test here in December, good luck first and foremost, and hopefully this video can help you get ready for that test. All right, guys, so again, if you haven't joined the membership, that's totally fine. You can still follow along by clicking the links that I'll post within the live stream or the links that are also posted in the video description below. You guys can check those out. But yeah, thumbs up if you're a member, thumbs up in the live stream, thumbs up below the video if this all makes sense and you're ready to follow along. The first thing, guys, that we always do in these reviews is the thing that I honestly, the most important thing that you can do during these review lessons, during any review for that matter, is to understand the format, the actual format of the SAT. And the reason that is so crucial is because it is so different. You'll see this in the background of my screen. For anybody that's following along, if you want to access the digital test form, that is posted by me in the live chat. You can also find that in the video description below. Click those links. They're right at the top of the description. And this is scoring for the SAT test number 10. Okay, scoring SAT test 10. And what you guys are looking at here is you're looking at the scoring table, right, as it relates to the specific SAT. Okay? Looking for the scoring table as it relates to the SAT. So if we see this here, let's see. Okay, this is again for test number 10. But the first thing that I want you guys to recognize, test 10. Test 10. While most students feel like this test while the test scale varies, and that's true to a certain extent, it doesn't really vary. Okay, again, from one question to the next, and particularly maybe at the very, very highest levels as we look at this test form, maybe at the highest levels it does, but overwhelmingly, this scale does not vary on an SAT exam, and that's very, very important to recognize. I like using SAT test number 10 because with the exception of Did I miss it? Am I on test 10 or test 9? Guys, I'm sorry. I meant to bring up test 9. Test 10 is not the scale. Give me one sec, guys. I meant to post test 9, so just hold on for just a second. It's not very hard to find this. I meant to post test 9 because test 9 is the scale that is very, very, it's right in the middle, essentially, right? For anybody that's worried about, well, is my test form going to, is my scale going to look the same as the one that you're showing me today? If you look at SAT test number 9 or SAT test number 6, both of those scales are relatively in the middle, let's call it, right? That don't have a lot of variation. And again, the test isn't too hard, it's not too easy. So you can use test 9 or test 6 that the College Board actually distributes. It's free to all students. If you use one of those two test forms to set your goals, and you'll see that now in the background of my screen. So give me one sec here. For anybody that's following along, we're going to use a different test form than the one that I posted originally. We're actually going to look at SAT test 9, test form 9 scoring. You guys will see this in the live chat here in a second. We'll update this for those that are watching the recording. So this is actually the SAT test 9 scoring. You guys again can follow along with this. Yeah, and this is the one that I actually wanted to bring up. I made a mistake there. Okay, but when we look at test number 9, not test 10, but rather test number 9, what we tend to see is we see this idea of how this exam is actually scored. A couple things to note, and I know this seems like for some of you that have been practicing for a long time, especially if you're a senior and potentially this December test is the last time you'll get to take the SAT. I'm sure you've seen this and understood this before, but the way that we're going to review this, the thought process behind what we're going to review is very, very, very critical. Okay, so first and foremost, what you guys will see up here is you'll see the reading, the writing and language, and the math scores. Those comprise, right, those are the fundamental sections of the SAT exam. And then over here, you'll see the raw scores, okay? So what raw score means is the number of answers correct. On the SAT reading section, there are 52 total questions, 52 questions. And the reading and the writing and language scores, when they're combined, you get 1/800 score. But those are really scored independently. So you can just add a 0 to all of these, right? This is the writing and language, even though we can't see it. But, right, it's the writing and language test up here. And so this total test score is out of 400, really. And this total test score is out of 400 as well. Thumbs up below the video if that makes sense. Right? And then those two scores are added together. Now, that in itself is not something that, that I'm sure that even somebody who hasn't looked at this very often, but generally understands what we're talking about, that's not any new, right? That's not anything new for you. However, there's something that's really, really important in understanding that, and that's the idea that every question on the SAT, roughly speaking, every question that you guys see the next time you take the real exam is going to be worth one question for 10 points. Okay, so you can see that, right? If you go up on the writing and language section here, roughly speaking, right, it's the same on reading. Reading has the right, and on math. Every time that you guys that you get one more question right, you're essentially adding 10 points. And if you don't believe me, right, if you're like, well, that's not true, it is true because there are 1,600 total points available. And again, if it's not true maybe from one exact question to the next, but on average, there are 1,600 total points available on the SAT. If you didn't know this before, there are 154 total questions available to answer on the SAT. 1,600 divided by 160, right, is 10. So 1,600 divided by 154 is roughly 10 points per question. And again, it varies, especially at the higher levels of the test, a little bit. But for the most part, we can think about that. 10 points per one question. So that's really, really important for two reasons. Okay, the first is, of course, that as you get more and more tired, right? As you get more and more tired throughout the test, the one overwhelming constant is that everybody gets exhausted. It's a very, very long 3.5-hour test. It requires a lot of focus, especially at the highest levels of this exam. And kind of the overwhelming feeling is once we get to a question that we're not certain of, particularly on the math sections, and particularly if we don't feel totally comfortable with math, right? But this is true for any student. If reading is your worst section, then same things kind of apply. But as we get to these sections of the exam, okay, writing and language and math, as we get to these sections, the thing that we want to be aware of is that every question is worth 10 points. Okay, that's the first thought. If I were to write down anything, I would write down some type of motivating speech or something to myself, right? That says every question is worth 10 points. So that moment that you sit there and you're like, oh, another question, what do I have to do to get out of this, right? This is the last thing in the world. Who's ever had that thought? Thumbs up, guys, if you've had that thought, right? Where you're just sitting there just dreading the next question because the one question you're looking at is very difficult. And we'll get into how to approach that strategy in a second. Okay, but we want to move on from that thought because every time we have that thought and we just kind of give up on a question and then maybe give up on the next one because we're just so over the test, every time we do that, we're losing 10 points. We cannot have that happen, especially for all of you out there, and I know there's a lot of you because we have a lot of you guys participating on these videos. We cannot have a situation where we're losing 10 points just because we don't feel like it. That cannot happen. For anybody that asks in these live chats, and we get a lot of students that are like, well, how do I get above a 1400? Well, the first thing is to look at your previous practice test forms and ask yourself, did I just start giving up at any point in the exam? And if the answer to that question is yes, like, oh, I don't like the reading test and I just don't like this passage, right? How do we get beyond that? How do we move past that idea? And I think that in my experience and with students that I've worked with, the easiest way to do that is to think that you're just giving away 10 points every time you feel that way, right? And that hopefully will be a motivating factor to be like, every time I sit there and I look at a question that I don't like to do, then I need to make sure that I skip that one and find a question that I do know how to do. I mean, that is the general theory of our strategies when it applies to the SAT. Because we can't let one question affect the rest of our test, or all of a sudden this one question plus 10 points suddenly multiplies to 8 questions. We just really, really don't want to be there anymore. And look, that's 80 points, right? Or somewhere between 60 and 80 points, but let's, for the sake of ease, let's just call it 80 points that you're just throwing away because it was maybe just one question that confused you. Okay, again, guys, thumbs up if that makes sense. For anybody that's joining late, we're going through the SAT scoring table. You can see that as a post. If you're interested, again, in participating in the live chat, you can absolutely do that by joining our membership program. Silver, you can click the join button below, and that allows you access to participate in the live chat. And if not, no worries. This video is still always going to be free. These reviews are going to be free, so you can just follow along. And again, we're looking at the scoring guide, which is posted as the last link as a part of the live chat. It's also posted in the video description below. So again, when we look at that, that's the thought process. Now, that's the first important thing about understanding the scoring and the scale for the SAT exam. Again, for those that are watching, thumbs up below the video if you haven't already, if that all makes sense. That we need to figure out ways that we can move through this test without having to feel completely overwhelmed, right, by one single question. That happens all the time, whether that be on the reading section, if reading is your worst section, whether that be on the math section, right, if math is your worst section. Happens all the time where we just let one question affect us, and that can't happen because I can't tell you how often we see it where that just multiplies. Let's try to avoid that more than anything else come test time, whether it be this Saturday or the next time you take it. Okay? So that's the first thing. That's the first thing that we always talk about with the scale. But the second thing is probably even more important, and truth be told, beyond this individual question and the idea that you would be losing 10 points if you just decided to give up on a question, is setting realistic goal scores for ourselves and then thinking about it not in terms of in terms of your score, but in terms of the number of questions that you can answer correctly. Okay, the number of questions that you want to answer correctly. Okay, what does that mean? Well, first and foremost, I can't tell you how often we have students that come in that tell me that their goal score is for the test this Saturday. And this is not applicable if you're taking the test in 8 months. If you're taking in 8 months, you can absolutely improve your score. And that's what the purposes of our videos are about, to stay 100% positive at all times. But in addition to the positivity, we also want to stay realistic, because if we don't stay realistic, that idea of letting one question get to us happens too frequently. So what I want everybody to think about as you approach any time you're taking the SAT, whether that be a practice test or the real thing, is I want you to set a goal score for yourself, and then I want you to equate it to this table. Okay, and what do I mean by that? Well, let's say, for example, one of you is sitting there and you are a phenomenal reading student. Okay, you're a phenomenal reading student. Sorry, guys, I have something in my eye here. Okay, You're a phenomenal reading student, and your goal on the reading section, or reading, writing, and language, right? Your goal here is to get, let's say, a 700 total. I'm sure some of you are sitting there saying, yeah, that's my goal score. Well, again, you might be better at writing and language or at the reading section. In my experience, most students are better at writing and language than reading if 700 is their goal score. But let's just say theoretically that means that you need to get a 360 and a 340, okay, and a 340. And again, when you'll remember that, I don't know why the SAT does this, it's so dumb, but it's just, they just do it. Every time we look at these, this 34 and 36 should really just be thought of as a 340 and a 360. We know, right, guys, that 340 on the reading section plus 360 on writing and language is equivalent to a 700. Again, thumbs up below the video, or if you're part of our membership program and participating in the live chat, thumbs up in the live chat. Okay, but thumbs up, guys, if this makes sense. That if you score 340 on reading and 360 on writing and language, there's your equivalent 700 overall. Now, everybody goes into this exam thinking, I got to get a 700, right? I know a lot of students that watch these videos have very, very high goal scores for themselves, and that's awesome. That's great. But we can't let that get in the way. We can't let that affect our thought process while we're taking the test. We can't be, the thought of, oh, I'm not going to get into Harvard now, that is not a good thought while you're taking the test. You can blame whatever or talk about it after the test as much as you want. But during the test, we need to be very present. And again, going back to this idea of being very task-oriented, how do I stay on task? The absolutely easiest way to do that is to think about this as, here are 40 questions. Okay, if I get 40 questions right, if I get 40 questions, 40 out of 44 on the writing and language section, I have now met my goal of a 360. I've now met my goal of a 360 on that section of the test. Okay, likewise, right? Likewise, if I think of this as on the reading section to get a 340, right? I need to get 42 out of 52 questions. So again, guys, thumbs up if this makes sense. 42 out of 52 questions. Beyond talking about the actual test sections that we're going to get into in the second half of this review, these are absolutely essential items to being a great test taker. Because if you think about it, guys, 42 out of 52, right? 42 out of 52 is equivalent to skipping 10 questions. Skipping 10 questions. Think about that. Think about that on the reading section. And it applies on every section, but think about that on the reading section. If you were to skip 10 questions, that would mean that you could always skip one full passage. You could skip a full passage and still end up with a 340 and be on pace for a 700. Skipping one full passage. Maybe that's the passage that you like the least. Right? Maybe that's the passage that you like the least. But in any case, you could skip 10 questions, one full passage, and still end up being on pace going into the writing and language section to get your 700 on this section of the test. That is insane. That's crazy. I mean, think about how much that scale is in your favor. And this is why I say the formatting is so important. Because if we don't understand the formatting, our first reactions, our first thoughts, the vast majority of the time, are going to be surrounding the idea of what is my score. It can't be that way. That just throws us right, especially when we get to a difficult question. Thumbs up, guys, if you've had the experience where you're sitting there and you're doing great, right? You're doing awesome, and then all of a sudden the one difficult question comes through and you're like, oh no. And that one difficult question, because you were doing so well in your mind, you started to get maybe too overly ambitious or overly confident, the one difficult question completely throws you off for the rest of the test. We cannot have that experience. Instead, we need to be going into this exam saying, hey, look, if I skip 10 questions, not just one, not just the one difficult one, but if I skip 10 of these, I'm still on pace, right, for a 340. I'm still on pace to get my 340 on this section of the test, which puts me on pace to still get a 700 overall. I mean, again, guys, think about that as how insane that is in terms of what that means from a school test. When you sit in school, right, when you guys are in school, 42 out of 52, let's do the math quick, right? 42 out of 52 in school is roughly a 79%. No, it's 81%, going the other way, right? It's roughly 81%. But on this test, we just said a 340, right, was equivalent to a 34. Guys, a 340 is in the top 5% of all SAT readers. Do you see that gap? Think about that, guys. Think about how different that feels. For everything you've ever done in school, the way that you're going to approach this is going to feel like, hey, I'm going to get an 81%, and that does not feel good. But in reality, because of the way the SAT is scaled, you're actually in the 95th percentile of this exam. That is so crazy. You're in the 95th percentile of the exam, and that's how we want to approach it instead. We want to be thinking, if I'm in the 95th percentile, boy, I can do this. I can do this. Does that make sense? Thumbs up, guys. Thumbs up below the video if that makes sense. That you have such a major advantage in understanding this scale that if you go into this exam in the reading section in particular, because reading, really we see students never, overall students don't struggle with the writing and language tests nearly as often as they do with the reading and the math sections. And the reason for that is if you're a great math student, it's usually reading that's throwing you off. If you're a great, reading and humanities student, then it's typically math that throws you off. But it's not typically the grammar rules, right? Memorizing grammar rules, that's not typically the issue. Okay, so again, 81%, and what feels like an 81, because 42 out of 52 is what we feel, right, in school, we've always been taught on a percentage basis, is actually a 95% on the SAT exam. You're actually getting a 95, you're in the 95th percentile, and that goes to the idea that you're competing against students next to you, the 95th percentile. So if you're giving up on a question and you want to go to Harvard or whatever your goal is, you want to get big scholarship money, right? You got to be thinking about the students sitting next to you and compete with that person, because that's ultimately what you're competing with. You're not competing to show that you know something on the test. You're showing that you know more than the vast majority of students out there. That's how you want to compete. And when you do that, you'll be amazed that you never run into any issues with feeling a lack of confidence on one individual question. You're just like, yeah, I'll go ahead and skip that question. I don't want to do that ever. Does that make sense, guys? Thumbs up, guys, if that makes sense. Thumbs up below the video if that all makes sense. Give me one sec. My dog, I think, is crying here. Come on, come in. Let's go. Come on. Sorry about that, guys. I didn't like a dog crying in the middle of a live stream, huh? All right, in any case, hopefully all that makes sense. And to capitalize on that, right, to come back to that, and to capitalize on that outside of dog issues, it gets better. There's more. If you really understand the formatting of a standardized test, it gets better. It's like an infomercial, right? You buy one in the next 15 minutes, you get two for free or whatever, right? That's how this SAT works, because the other major difference between this test and a test that you would see in school is the fact that the vast majority of the SAT questions, and you need to understand this formatting. I can't stress this enough. Come on. Okay, the vast majority of these questions are multiple choice questions, right? The vast majority of these questions are multiple choice questions. And if you know the vast majority of these questions are multiple choice, that gives you another distinct advantage over every other student that's going to sit down either Saturday or the next time you have to take a real test. Okay? That advantage means that you can guess. Okay? You can guess throughout the whole test if necessary, but obviously we're not going to try to do that. I don't encourage this. But let's say theoretically you have identified, and for those that have seen our reading videos in the past, you will know this strategy already. But let's say that on the reading section, again, because reading and math tend to be the ones that students struggle with the most, right? You're either typically a good math student or a good reading student, okay? But let's say that you struggle on the reading section, and we'll get to math here in a second, and you have correctly identified which reading passage, right? They're always in the same order. The first one's the narrative, the second one is either humanities or social science, third is natural science, so on and so forth. And let's say you've identified your best or your worst passage, okay? Think about that. You've identified your best or your worst passage. What are you doing? Come on, let's go. Sorry, guys, this is a... Come on. Come on. Let's go. tough having a dog during live streams, right? Okay, let's say you've identified your best or your worst passage. Okay, and let's say that's passage number 4. Okay, so let's say from question number 33 here, right? 33 roughly, or I think it's 32 on this test. I don't know, 32 to 42. Those are your 10 questions. As if you've identified those 10 questions, if you've thought to yourself, okay, these 10 questions I don't know how to do. These are not questions during my practice that I have done well on. Can everybody give me a thumbs up if that makes sense? That I have not done well on these 10 questions. Okay? If you think about that and you identify that, and then you don't do those questions at all, right? You never do those questions. And you sit there at 42 out of 52. If you don't do those questions at all, and that means that you've taken the time to not do the hardest passage because you've practiced this, you've taken the time out of doing those 42 out of 52 questions, and you've taken all the time from your bad passage and you've applied it to the other 42 questions, right? You've done everything you could to find that one passage that you don't typically do well on, and you apply it to the other 42 questions. At minimum, you're sitting at a 340 here, right? 340. We've already talked about that on the scale. You're on pace, right? And again, I think the writing and language section is significantly easier than the reading section. You're on pace for a 700, and you can still guess. The biggest advantage that I had as a kid, I was a great test taker. I really was. I was a great test taker and a very lazy student. And I would give anything to reverse that. So for anybody sitting out there, and I know that there's a lot of you, that's sitting there being like, I just can't figure out these tests, and it drives me crazy, whether that be one section of the test or the test as a whole. If you are a hard worker, I can't tell you how much better of a trait that is than being a good test taker just naturally. That is not a good trait. That applies to very little things, and we can make you a better test taker. If we take the stress and anxiety, I didn't have very much stress or anxiety when I was a kid, and that's why I was so lazy. I just figured, oh, it's going to work out, blah, blah, blah. But on a video like this, I knew the test day, I had to know the format of the test. I was great at that in school tests, on school finals, and I was great on it on the SAT because I knew that if I wanted to get a 1500 on the SAT, then I needed to be the most efficient test taker I could be. And that typically meant that I could skip 15 questions on the test as a whole and still get a 1500. That is the most important thing that you're going to get out of this video. I promise. We're going to go through each individual section, but that concept of the last 2-3 minutes that I just described is the most important thing that you can go into the next test with. Because that alone gives you it reduces your stress and anxiety and gives you the confidence to say, hey, look, I might be bad, and I knew this about myself. I knew I was lazy. I knew I was bad at certain things. I knew I was good at other things. I was very aware of that when I was a kid. And I knew that, hey, I'm not going to be very good at some of these questions because I didn't put in the time and I didn't put in the effort. And I used to just kind of, I would do anything to change that around. But let's say that you have those 42 questions. I know I can get 42 right. I hope all of you guys are sitting there saying, hey, look, I can get 42 questions right. And if you do that and then you guess the same letter down, let's talk about that, right? Let's say we get 1/4 and we guess the same letter down for the last 10 questions. Statistically speaking, we're going to get 3 more questions right. Can everybody see that? If there are 4 answer choices, right, it's 2.5. But if you use a proper guessing technique, and I'll show you guys the guessing technique for the next time you take a test, if you can believe it, there is one of those as well. That's going to get you 3 additional questions, and you never did the hardest passage. Again, we talk about this with students all the time. I've done a lot of live streams. We have a lot of views on this channel at this point, and it all comes down to how you're approaching the test. You'll never hear me be negative in these live streams. You guys have great futures and great lives ahead of you. I really believe that for every single person that puts a positive mindset on this, you have a great future ahead of you. But it has to be internal. You have to want that, because if I want it more than you do, that's a huge problem. You got to be competitive. You got to look at the student sitting next to you, and you got to want to not give up. That person's going to get 10 more points, so I'm going to get 10 more points. And all of a sudden, if you keep that mindset going, hey, that person's going to do another question, so I'm sure going to do another question. I'm not giving up if that person's giving up, right? If you do that, you will be amazed at how many consecutive questions you can get right. And again, if you go in with an approach, an efficient approach, we keep talking about the word efficiency, right? Efficiency, efficiency, efficiency. And you guess the final 10 questions on the passage that you know the least, Watch what happens, right? Let's say we pick, there is a guessing technique. Let's say we pick A in this case, right? Let's say we pick A. In this case, you get 4 additional questions right. If you don't guess on your final, I just picked passage number 4 as the example. But let's say on average, if you use a guessing technique, you will get 3 additional questions right. In this case, you would have gotten 4. Look what happens to your score. We were already at a 340. We guessed 3 additional questions, right? On this test, we would have actually guessed 4 additional questions. But on most tests, let's say it's 3, but 45 or 46 gets you to a 350 or 360. You get a 350 to a 360 as kind of a buffer, right, as a cushion as you go into the writing and language section to guarantee yourself a 700. And the beauty of this is it works at every level of the test. Let's say instead of 42 questions, right, you're looking to get a 600 on the reading section, right, between reading and the writing and language sections. So in order to get a 600, you would have to get, let's say on average, a 300 on writing and language, which means that you have to get a 34 out of 52, right? 34 questions out of 52. Well, lo and behold, if you get 34, that's only 3 out of 5 passages, right? 34 out of 52 is only 3 out of 5 passages. And if you guess on the remaining 18 questions, you're going to pick up an additional 6 questions, which puts you at a 40, which is now at a 330. And some of you are probably sitting there being like, there's no way this works. I promise you it works every time. The thing that makes this channel and our strategies different, and I've worked for other companies, that's why we started this company and started talking about these different strategies, is because I recognize that all of this other stuff that you hear is all based on emotion. Like, oh, you should do this because of this, right? It's like, well, how do you know that? And then the response to, well, how do I know, is like, oh, it's just the right strategy. That is not a good way to approach this. This is a mathematical formula that if you can take all the time away from the 18 questions that you skipped, right? 18 questions that I skipped, and you're just very, very focused on the 3 passages so that you don't get tired, you don't get overwhelmed, and you remove those 18 in order to apply 100% accuracy to the 34 questions, the 3 best passages that you do know how to do, right? Your score is going to end up being a 330, which would then put you on pace for a 650, 660 on the reading, writing, and language sections. Guys, thumbs up below the video if that makes sense. Thumbs up below the video if that makes sense. It is so critical to be thinking about it in that way, because it is not some emotional, subjective strategy that I'm throwing at you. This is mathematically, objectively speaking, this is how you'd want to approach this. It takes so much stress and anxiety off of the exam. So much stress and anxiety off of this test. Okay, thumbs up again if you guys feel pretty comfortable with those ideas. And the beauty of it is that it works for math as well. Oh, by the way, if you're looking for how the guessing strategy works, you just want to go back and look at the answer choices that you've already selected and then select the least used answer choice. So for example, if you don't see a lot of A's, you'll have a bubble sheet and you realize, hey, I haven't really picked A very often, and I have 18 questions that I skipped. For all 18 of those, select A. Now, why is that difficult? Well, that's difficult because most students don't want to just select the same letter because you know you're going to get a lot of questions wrong. But you are guaranteed to get 6 questions right. So if you go in, all of this is mathematical, right? All of this is objective. I'm not just making this stuff up. And with that, and the idea of that means that if you go in and you have a goal number of questions that you want to answer, and you put all of your time into those questions with 100% accuracy, with about a minute to go, you can look back at your bubble sheet, determine which of those answer choices have been used the least, the one that has not been filled out, and then just pick that the rest of the way down. And I guarantee if you get 34 questions done, you will consistently guess 6 additional questions right, at least 6 out of 18, even though it feels like it should be like 5 out of 18. You'll guess 6 out of 18 right, and all of a sudden your 300 score that you were shooting for, just by focusing on the ones that you know how to do, suddenly turns into a 330. And that is the biggest difference. That is the most important thing you can think about in terms of the formatting of this exam. Most important thing you can think about in terms of the formatting of the exam. Okay, so does that all make sense, guys? Any questions? Any questions? again, we've made it so that the live chat for this one, if you're joining us for the live lesson, we've made it exclusive for members only. You also get premium content if you become a member. That membership is $3 a month. It includes 25 videos that are available to nobody else for $3 a month. I promise it's worth it. If you want to join the membership, you can click the join button below. If you're thinking about buying a book, I guarantee that those 25 videos are way better than a book. And we actually write our own book. Okay, so we have a book available on Amazon that all of our tutors write, and I still don't think that that's worth it, especially for the price, because that's $25. You can have the membership for 10 months, almost 10 months, right? So again, if you're interested in joining the membership program, you get premium content and the ability to ask your own questions during these live chats. So I highly recommend it. You can click the join button to join the silver membership below. Otherwise, you guys can always follow along with these videos as we go through them. All right, so keep thinking about that as we work through these things. But hopefully, all of this makes sense as you approach the test and you think about the format potentially in a different way than maybe you were thinking about it before this review. All right, does that all make sense, guys? Before we transition into individual sections, give me a thumbs up below the video if you haven't already. Again, look out if you want to join that membership program. I highly encourage it. It's gotten some great responses from students that have already done that. I think this is also a good time to remind you that subscribing to the channel is 100% free. And if nothing else, guys, we also have a STARU tutoring app. For those that have seen it before, you can access a significant amount of our written content, right, like SAT writing and language. You can do that by accessing STARU, which is available in the App Store and on Google Play. So let me post that quick. Again, that's free to download, and it's 100 free lesson problems. Actually, you know what, guys? That's actually pinned to the top of the message board. If you guys are interested in that, I'll post it here again, but that message that's pinned at the top can also be accessed. So highly encourage you guys to look at that. You can click, if you download STARU and register your free student account, you get 100 free lesson chapters between the 4 sections of the SAT exam. You can go in here. You can read about how to improve your parallelism, which is a grammar function within the SAT writing and language section. And then right away you can do 4 grammar questions that relate directly to parallelism. And all of our questions are developed from practice questions from real questions that we have seen on real SAT exams over the last 4 or 5 years. It's all written by our current SAT and ACT tutors. So even if you don't want to join the membership program, I highly encourage you to download STARU and at least create a student account where you can start working on some of these practice problems that are very specific to you. Okay, so that's I think that's very important, and obviously that one's free, so even if you don't join the membership program, that one should be kind of a no-brainer. You just go in, it takes 2 minutes to create a student account, and you get free practice and free content, basically free pages from our book. That you'd otherwise have to purchase. So look out for STARU. Encourage you guys to look at that, and we'll keep going. All right. Okay, so let's talk about individual sections. So let me just post this again, just so you guys have it. We're looking at SAT test number 9. I'll post this as part of in the live chat. It will also be posted below the video. So one sec here. The link for SAT test number 9, which is the one that we'll take a look at, is going to be posted below. SAT test 9. Okay. So that's posted. Again, we'll go through that together, and then I'll give you guys some helpful resources. Again, these ones will be free resources that you can take a look at in terms of identifying helpful videos and helpful tools that will continue to help you beyond just this review, because we won't have enough time to cover everything during the review. But yeah, we'll start with SAT Test 9, and we'll start with the reading section. So once you have that file open, can everybody, if you haven't already, or if you're just joining us, can everybody give me a thumbs up that you have the SAT Test number 9 open? And if you've already given a thumbs up, I will assume that you have it open. and we will get started here with the reading section. And I'll talk to you a little bit about the importance of the reading section. So first and foremost, before doing anything else, we also have a playlist, a significant amount of content, free content that's within these playlists, covering all of the kind of nuances to the SAT reading section. I will post that, and then we will start talking a little bit about specifics of the reading test, things that you can be doing in order to best prepare yourself for your next SAT exam, whether that be this Saturday or sometime in the future. This is SAT reading playlist. So you guys can click that playlist. That'll give you more videos to the SAT reading section. But there's really two things. I guess there's a couple different things, but two things that I want you to be aware of as you approach the reading section. The first is that the reading section, and I'm sure many of you feel this way, that the SAT reading section is the hardest section. I don't think there's any question that even if you're a great reader, this is the hardest section. For math students out there, that even if you get an 800 on math, right, SAT reading can then feel very, very overwhelming because this test is largely strategy-based, right? Unlike the writing and language and the math sections, there's not a ton you can do in terms of preparation other than to read more. Okay, so this is a longer-term idea. Again, if you're taking the test very, very soon, this isn't really going to help you. But I would highly encourage that you read for 15 minutes every day, 15 minutes every day. From now, if you're a junior, now until you take the March test, right? After December, the next one isn't until March. That gives you 4 months to be reading 15 minutes every day. But that's part of the reason that this becomes difficult, is that not very many students in today's day and age read very consistently. And the benefit that I had is that the one very difficult section on the SAT was my best section because I love to read. I still love to read. I read hours each day. That does not mean that I read a novel every day. I do not. But whether that be independent articles, New York Times, Washington Post, sports articles. If you like sports, read sports articles. It doesn't have to be the most boring novel in the world. You just need to be reading, and 15 minutes kind of allows for those essay type readings, right, to really, really be helpful. You just need to be reading more. And again, that's not a great strategy if you're taking the test very, very soon, but it is a great strategy if you're taking the test in a couple of months because you can absolutely start implementing this, and it's all about discipline. Now, again, I knew that this was the hardest section, and just by sheer luck, the fact that I like to read a lot helped me you can memorize concepts on the other 3 sections of this test. There's not a ton you can do if you don't like to read and you choose not to read more going forward. You have to do that. That is rule number 1. So thumbs up if that makes sense. If you're not a big reader, yet you're expecting a really high score, we see this from students all the time. Like, oh, I really want to get a 1500 and I want to go to Stanford. It's like, well, do you read a lot? No. And I don't, and then we'll say, well, you got to read more. It's like, I know, I just don't like to read. Well, at that point, I don't know what to say, right? I don't know what to tell you. At some point, it has to be a personal, disciplined decision to say, like, I'm just going to read more. You can't get away from it. This is the one section where you can't really get away with not reading a lot. And the SAT has done that intentionally with the reading section. It is difficult, especially with the time constraint. You have to be very focused. Now, having said all of that and being very obviously adamant about those different things with reading more, there are specific strategies that can be implemented very quickly to make sure that you at least perform as efficiently as you can on any given reading test. And what this comes down to is I just said focus. If you want to get a really high reading score, right, on the reading section in particular, you have to be very focused. And focused on 5 consecutive passages. For those that don't remember, it's written just right here, right? 52 questions, 65 minutes. Okay? 52 questions, 65 minutes. So for those that haven't seen that before, that's a long time to read. I suggested reading 15 minutes every day. Now you're having to read 65 minutes. So if you want to get a really high reading score, you got to be focused for 5 consecutive passages. Now, what happens if that's not going to be right? You're not going to be ready for that come your next test, especially if it's in a couple of days. Well, the first thing is that you need to figure out the order of your passages. And within that reading playlist that I posted in the chat, you need to is a number of helpful video resources that describe the order of the passages, individual order, as well as how you can reorder the passage to best suit you. But you need to find the order of your passages, right? Your passages. And the easiest way to do that, okay, a drill that can be really helpful, is to take a reading test with this format, right? You can do this before your next exam. Reading, right? You're going to take a reading test, reading section, full, but you're not going to do it in the traditional sense. You're going to line up a table. Okay, let me see if I can do this. This is how I would practice. This is how our students, our individual students practice this, okay, or how we have them practice. You're going to set up a table for yourself, and you're going to complete a reading section, but you're not going to use a traditional timer. You're going to use a stopwatch instead. It's a great drill to help you identify which passages you typically do the best on, not only from a timing or rather not only from an accuracy perspective, but from a timing perspective as well. The goal always is to be 100% on accuracy, right? You need to take as much time as you possibly can, especially in this drill, to identify how long it takes you to be 100% accurate on each passage. And then you're just going to line it up, right? Passage 1, passage 2, right? Passage 3, and so on and so forth, all the way down to passage 5. And you're going to create a 5-row table for yourself. And within that table, you're going to have 100% accuracy underlined. So how long does it take you on passage 1 to go 10 out of 10? And then you're going to use a stopwatch to figure out exactly how much time it takes you. So for example, if you're 10 out of 10 here, but it takes you 20 minutes to go 10 for 10, whereas on passage number 5, you're 11 out of 11 or 10 out of 10, whatever, right? The passages vary, either 10 questions or 11 questions. And here you're 11 for 11, but it only takes you 13 minutes to complete. Well, geez, that's a pretty big difference. So maybe we start by doing passage number 5 first so that we get off to a good start. So thumbs up if that makes sense. Right? Maybe we start out, if we practice this way and we know exactly how long, I would say that you can do this in one section, but if you do 3 reading sections and you identify this with a stopwatch every time, you will know the exact passage order that best suits you so that you can be the most accurate with the most efficient amount of time. Okay, that's first and foremost. First and foremost. Okay, thumbs up again, guys. Thumbs up if that all makes sense. This again be very, very helpful because it allows you to stay focused on passages that you actually like to read for the most part, or like to read even more than others. And you've proven that you can be accurate on those. And most importantly, if you can get a time, right? If you get a time for each of these, and you figure out that, hey, these 4 passages are the ones that get me to 65 minutes when I add them up, well, why don't I do those 4 passages in that order, in some type of order like that, so that when I come back and I have to guess, I'm guessing on the one passage that I've always struggled with, that's taken me the most amount of time, or that I can't seem to be accurate on. That's the one I'm going to guess on, not missing time just because I ran out of time and I didn't get to passage number 5, even though passage number 5 might be my best passage. We cannot have that happen. We want to be as efficient as possible by not lining up the passages in an order that is non-efficient for us. That only comes with practice. The only way that you can do that and personally guarantee your passage order, your specific passage order, is that if you practice and you do it in that format, in that way. You got to be practicing this stuff, though, because it is different from one student to the next. Not everybody's going to love to read natural science passages. Not everybody's going to run and read history passages. So we got to figure out which one is you, right? Not everybody's going to like to read narrative passages. We got to figure out which one is you. Okay, some thoughts on that as well. And again, if you guys see that reading playlist that I posted, there's much more in-depth videos regarding these different passages. But the first passage on the reading section is always a narrative passage. The second passage is either a history passage or a social science passage. Social science studies, right? So we'll say social studies. Okay, 3 is always a natural science again. Natural science. 4 is the one that's opposite of 2, so it's either history or social studies. Social studies. And then 5 is another natural science passage. right? So if you know those passage order, that can be very helpful. But on top of that, what I want everybody to recognize, this is going to be important for your timing on Saturday if you're taking the test very soon, or if you want to continue to think about it, is that the narrative passage is passage number 1. And this passage is typically the easiest read, okay, easiest read, but it has the most time-consuming questions. That's something I want everybody to write down. And again, we have that included as part of that video playlist. If you know that these are the most time-consuming questions, you can approach this in one of two ways. If it is the easiest read, and the questions are generally pretty easy because the reading is pretty easy, but they are time-consuming because a lot of these questions end up being very tone or theme-based questions, right? It's not nearly as direct as the natural science. On the flip side, right, the natural science passages, and sometimes the historical passages, but by and large, the natural science passages tend to be the hardest read, right, with the easiest questions. Hardest read, easiest questions. All right, guys, thumbs up if that makes sense, because again, that gives you an opportunity to see which question types or which passages are going to be best for you. And if you know exactly where you are within the test, it's very, very unlikely, highly, highly unlikely that you're going to run into a situation where you feel extremely overwhelmed, okay? So extremely overwhelmed by this idea of like, oh no, what happens if I don't get to somewhere? If you know exactly where you are within the test, and we're going to write down times as well, you're going to be just fine. So generally speaking, through passage number 1, you want to be somewhere in the 13 to 17 minute mark. So yeah, 13 to 8, let me back this up. You want to be somewhere, let's say around 50 minutes, right? 50 minutes from passage number 1, somewhere around there. Now, I always say to students that that's probably plus or minus like 2 minutes, right? So if you're a little above time, if you're at 48 minutes, you might want to speed up a little bit. But if you practice this, then you don't necessarily need to, right? 50 minutes plus or minus 2. By the then we get down here on history, social science, probably somewhere around 37 minutes. Then 25 minutes, because natural science tends to go a little bit faster if we're paying attention. It also gives you those figures and tables questions. Okay, then somewhere around 13 minutes, I think, here. This is where you want to be finishing the passage, right? This is where we're all finishing, and then maybe 0 to 1 minute left for the final passage. And that's if you're trying to get all 5 passages done. Now you can see that if you just eliminate, right, let's say we eliminate this passage altogether, we've now added 13 minutes to all of these other passages. Again, thumbs up, guys, if that makes sense in terms of taking the stress and anxiety off of you, right? If you take away your worst passage, you've now added 13 minutes that can be applied to any other passage on the reading section. And that's extremely, extremely important. Right? Extremely important for the reading section. Everybody good on that? Thumbs up, guys. If you haven't given us a thumbs up if you do. I'm not because we now have so much content available on the channel. I'm not going to get too much further than these kind of baselines. I do think that the first 30, 45 minutes of this first video, of this review video, is really important in terms of understanding the scoring and how to approach the test. But beyond that, I want you guys to check out those playlist videos because they go very in-depth and they're very specific to something that you might be wanting to focus on. There's plenty of content, and I'm going to be posting the playlists for each of we have one for the reading section, one for the writing language, and then again one for the math section. Okay, so that's it for reading. Hopefully that all makes sense, but those are the passage orders. It's very, very important that you start to implement these things prior to your next exam, and really focus, guys, on what can be implemented, right? Of the things I just mentioned over the last 15, 20 minutes, which of those things can be implemented in a very short amount of time? Actually, I forgot one last thing. The final thing that I want to bring up with the reading section is that this is section number 1. It is very, 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 very important that we warm up prior to taking this test. Very, very important. I can't stress how often we see students decide not to warm up, right? Not to be ready to go. I want you to be thinking as you go into this exam, what are you doing right before you start? In my experience working with, at this point it's been like 25, if you can believe it, 2,500 students. It seems kind of crazy, but 2,500 students over the last 8 to 9 years. Most students, and this might be you as well, but most students think of this idea as we go from our home, right, to immediate testing. This might be you, right? That's kind of how our brain processes this. So a lot of times when I ask students, like, well, what are you going to be doing right before the reading test starts? What's going on right before the reading test starts? And most people say driving to the testing location. But in reality, the time that comes from leaving your home, right, to the time that you start testing, or even the time when you wake up, right, the time when you wake up for the exam, to the time that you leave your house, leave your home, to the time you actually start testing, this is probably 1 hour from the time you wake up, and this is probably another 45 minutes, right? You drive to the testing location, you get in line to register, that's a little bit of a process. You tend to sit there, and it's very important, and you can use STARU to do this. If you download STARU and create your student account, you can use this to be doing warm-up questions, right? Do warm-up questions on your phone as you're standing in line waiting to register so that your brain isn't just complete mush and anxiety and stress, right? That those don't start to creep in right before you're starting to take the test. You'll have your phone up until probably 5 to 10 minutes before you start. So that entire time, what I'd love for many of you or all of you guys to be doing is to be warming up. When you go into that STARU app, you can click Lessons and Practice Problems, click SAT Reading, click, let's say, Words and Context Questions. Those are good ones to warm up with. And then lo and behold, if you click the Tap to Start button at the bottom, you have a full passage here, right? You have a passage here that then corresponds to the questions that you're being asked. The main purpose of the passage, right? Does that all make sense, guys? So you can be doing practice problems on your phone. All of this is available in the app form on your phone, on Android, and on iOS, to be doing practice problems all the way through until you actually start the exam. So rather than starting and missing 2 of the first 5 questions just because you're a little nervous, you're a little anxious, you're not as focused as you need to be, rather than missing those 2 questions and just throwing away 20 points, be doing warm-up practice problems so that you get those anxiety and nerves out of your system before you start the real thing. Let's get those away from us before we actually get going for the real test. Okay, does that all make sense, guys? Again, thumbs up if you haven't given a thumbs up in the content or in the below the video, but prior to this, please do so now. But it's very, very, very critical that we're thinking about this and thinking about how we can approach this test prior to the proctor saying go. All right, very, very important. So after section number 1 is right. Section 1 is reading. Just to give you guys a little clarity, section 1 is reading. After section 1, you will have a 10-minute break. Okay, so after the reading section, we'll have a 10-minute break. And then we move on to section number 2, which is the writing and language section. Writing and language. Okay, just like the reading section, we have developed a playlist. I'm going to give you guys the 5 most important grammar rules that you should memorize prior to starting this test. Or that you can continue to work on, right? Here we go. I'm going to show you the importance of those as well. But here's let me post this in the chat as well. We have a writing and language. Right list. There we go. So here's our SAT writing and language playlist, which I highly encourage you guys to check out. And more importantly, here's a very, very critical video about the most important grammar rules to study basically this week prior to going into the real thing. Can also be found in the playlist 5 most important. That video specifically. Okay, we'll check that out. So when you get to the writing and language section, what I want you to remember is that you'll just be coming off of a break. During that break, it's important that you continue, take the 5 minutes the first 5 minutes to go to the bathroom, grab a drink of water. You'll be able to have be able to have a water bottle on your desk throughout. You'll be able to grab your snack during this time, right? So water and snack. This is how I would use my break if I were you. Water and snack during the first 5 minutes of the break. And it's usually, when I say 10 minutes, it can be 15 minutes too. It kind of is up to the proctor. They're never really going to start the test unless everybody's back in the room. If you push it too far, then they might start without you. But let's call it 10 to 15 minutes. But with the first 5 minutes or so, maybe 5 to 10 minutes, right, use that for water and snack. But then for the, let's say, get into the zone. Right? After you've recalibrated, re-energized yourself, for the final 5 minutes of that break, warm up again, right? Start to, at the very least, because I don't think you'll be able to use your phone. I know you won't be able to use your phone during this time, but at the very least, be thinking about what the writing and language test is going to offer you. Okay, on the writing and language test, there are 4 passages with the same number of questions, 11 questions per passage, right, which gives you roughly 9 minutes per passage. Now, I never like to set strict time limits for myself or for any students. So don't go into this thinking you've got to be at 9, then 18, then 27, then 36, right? Don't go into it. Think about it as 9 minutes is a good benchmark but give yourself plus or minus 1 minute. So that if you get to the 10-minute mark, but you're just finishing, that's totally fine. You'll probably make up the time on an easier passage in the future. Likewise, if you finish too early, you don't want to be finishing with less than 8 minutes per passage because that probably means you made a simple mistake. You're just going too fast, unless you know your grammar rules inside and out, which does happen. But you want to be thinking about plus or minus 1 minute when you start the writing and language test. Plus or minus 1 minute. That's a good baseline to be thinking about as you go into the writing and language section, because that means that you'll know, if worst case scenario happens, maybe you have to guess on 2 or 3 questions at the very end of the test. But in all likelihood, that'll put you on a time, right, capacity that will look pretty good, right? That in terms of letting you finish all the questions. I brought this up to a student recently, and it goes along with this idea of time management. Typically when we see students, this is a good time to bring this up, typically when we see students start to get worried about the time, right? Like, oh no, I'm behind on time. The first thing that they think about is to rush, right? Behind time, I gotta catch up. Right, need to catch up. I don't want you to think about that. What I want you to realize is that if you find yourself behind time, especially just a little bit behind time on any section, you, on average on this test, you have about other than the writing and language section, let's say you have 1 minute per question. Guys, if you find yourself running 3 minutes behind time, okay, 3 minutes behind pace, that everybody's first reaction, again, is to speed up, go as fast as I possibly can. On writing and language, which isn't like the reading section, there's not passage order, right? It's not like that in that way. If you're 3 minutes behind pace, that means that you only have to skip 3 questions, right? You're only 3 questions behind pace. So as an example, if you feel like I'm 27 out of 27, but I'm 3 minutes behind pace, if you were to skip, this isn't something that you need to do every time, but if you were to then skip just 3 questions, right? Skip 3, you would still be 27 out of 30, and now all of a sudden you're back on pace. And probably by the end of the test, when you got to 44 questions, you would just be 4 questions beyond pace. And like we said, 40 out of 44 is equal to a 360 on the writing and language section. So you would be, and then you'd get 4 questions to guess on. You'd pick up at least one of those. Now you're at 41 out of 44, and you're looking at a 370 probably on the writing and language test. So you don't need to freak out if you're behind time. remember that every question, and it's even more in your favor on the reading and the math sections. But if you're behind time, think about skipping the number of questions that you feel like you're behind, right? If you get to a difficult question, just skip it. Maybe don't skip 3 in a row. Instead, say like, oh, is this question hard? Yes, now I'm going to skip it. For those that have watched our writing and language videos where I take these tests in real time, you'll notice me doing that. For example, if I get to a question that's at the end of a passage, right, and I feel like I'm behind pace, right? Let's say at the end of this passage, instead of 9 minutes, where I should be at question number 11, right? That's the final question. Instead, I'm at 10:30 for whatever reason. Maybe it was a hard passage, maybe one. If I skip this question, that's a lot better than skipping this question, right? We want to do 10. That's not going to take us very long. 11 is going to take us a while. And until we've caught up and caught back to our pace, maybe we skip question number 11. We just leave that one blank because maybe this one was going to take us 30 seconds, right? Maybe this one was going to take us 1.5 minutes. And now by just skipping this one question, we're back on time. It's right 10:30 instead of 10:30. I should be at 9 minutes. Well, one skip of a longer question on the writing and language section will make up that time by itself. So there's no reason to start rushing through these questions. If you feel like you're being accurate, stay accurate. You can make up time in very, very easy, thoughtful ways, namely by skipping a main idea question on the writing and language section if you feel like you're running behind pace. Okay, again, guys, for those that are just joining us or if you haven't already, thumbs up below the video if that makes sense. That thought process of, hey, I don't need to start rushing. I need to find 1 or 2 advantageous questions to skip, questions that I know are going to be time consuming, and I need to eliminate those from my thought process, and I can still get a bunch of questions right in the meantime. And then lo and behold, if I do have time at the end, I can always come back to those questions. If I don't, and I had to skip 4 questions, I'm still sitting at a phenomenal score if I manage to be accurate on those other questions. And I'm not nearly as worried or concentrated on my timing or being behind time and starting to rush as I may otherwise be. And that's how we got to approach that. That's how we have to approach that. Okay. Hopefully that makes sense, guys. Any questions from our members, please make sure that you post. Also, guys, if you do have questions when you're coming back to rewatch this, or if you have questions on our other videos, if you've clicked on those playlists, please don't be afraid to comment below these videos. Everybody can comment. One of our teachers or tutors, and myself included, but all of our teachers and tutors will be responding to those questions. So if you ever do have any questions while you're watching these videos, feel free to post those in the comments section, and somebody will definitely get back to you and be able to answer those for you. Okay. All right, so let's keep going. So that's really it for the writing and language section. If you watch that video, that's the last post in the live chat, the one about the 5 most important grammar rules to study the week before your ACT, or rather your week before your SAT, I think you'll be totally covered because those 5 grammar rules can be, and number 1 being punctuation, those 5 grammar rules and punctuation in particular can be memorized or at least reviewed between now and your next test, even if it's very, very soon. Okay, even if it's very soon, those can all be memorized. So think about that as you continue to approach this. Okay? All right, so the final section that we want to review and the final section that we want to discuss and talk about is the math section. There are a couple things that are really important about the math section that are a little bit different in terms of the formatting from any sections of the SAT or the ACT. If you go back to our scoring discussion, right, beforehand, you'll remember, let me go back, okay, on the math section, we always start with this. If you go back to our scoring discussion that we started with, you'll remember that I said that the math section is a little bit different. So let's go to the scoring table. If you guys are looking to follow along with this, you can find the digital link to this in the video description below or earlier in the live chat. And as we talk about the math section, we want to recognize a few things, and it's all related on the scoring table. So the math section right here, when you look at your scoring table, shows 58 questions. And that's really important because there, and more, maybe even more importantly, or more, right, something else that sticks out is that there's only one math section score. But we know that there are two math sections. We know that the overall section number 3 of the SAT, right, SAT section 3 is the math no calc section. We'll talk more about that in a second. And we know that SAT section number 4 is math with calc. Okay, so we know those things about the sections. But what we tend to forget, or what students who haven't taken this before tend to forget, is that the math no calc section has 20 questions, and the math calc section has 38 questions. And you'll see from our scoring, right, with 58, if we add those two sections together, the total number of questions between the two math sections is 58 questions. That tells us something extremely important. If you don't love the math section, and especially if you don't love the math no calculator section, I want you to recognize that a lot of times students who don't love math tend to not love, and this might be you if you're watching this video, this might be you, tend to not love the math no calc section, right? If a student doesn't love math, even though the no calc section is actually is pretty significantly easier, I think, than the calculator section, because the concepts are very straightforward, very Algebra 2 based. If you don't like math, this is probably a nightmare section, right? If it's not your best section because you like to use your calculator, please remember that there are 2 times as many points available and questions available on the calculator section. And the reason I bring that up to all students during these reviews is because section number 4 is difficult to stay focused for everybody. It's the 4th section for a reason. It's overwhelming because we're 2.5 hours into the test at this point. And it's then difficult to want to stay focused. But if we decide to give up on the no calc after the no calc section because we're just feeling overwhelmed, we're essentially shaving off twice as many questions on the calculator section just because it happens to come after the no calc section. And that can't happen either, especially for students out there who are looking, right, and especially for good math students. If you just coincidentally have a bad no calc section, do not let that affect this section, your calculator section, because you can make up twice as many points on the calculator section, right? Thumbs up if that makes sense. If we make up twice as many points on the calculator section, then by all means we need to come into that with some serious approach and serious commitment to doing well, but a lot of discipline to not let ourselves get into a negative mindset coming into the calculator section. Very, very critical. It seems so minute in terms of the approach here, but it is absolutely essential. Absolutely essential. So let me, with that in mind, let me post the playlist for our math section. And specifically, we created a video that's getting a lot of traction. We did a full video on our strategy called the 3-pass method. That's gotten a lot of traction in the last 24 hours. And I think that it's really, really critical that a lot of you guys watch this, especially if you're not feeling totally comfortable with the math section prior to your next exam. So, so that playlist is for SAT Math. And then this one, or this next video that I'm going to post specifically is about the SAT 3-pass method, which you will see here in just a second. Okay, so if you're not feeling great about the math section, you can see that in the video description. But the key with the math section is to make sure that you're always finding the easiest questions first. And I'll let that video, that 3-pass video, explain it better to you all. But the idea is that we're always letting the math section dictate, each question is going to dictate what we're looking at next. And so one of the things that I always like to bring up on the math test, and let me go back real quick and just remind you that after section number 2, so right, we said SAT reading was 1, SAT reading, then a 10-minute break, 10-minute break, so let's say 15 minutes just to be safe. It's probably is closer to 15-minute break. Okay, then you'll have section number 2, which is writing and language. Writing and language. Okay, then there's no break between section 2 and section 3. So right after writing and language, you're going to jump into math. And this is why that 3-pass strategy becomes so critical, because what the 3-pass strategy allows you to do, when you see it in that video that I posted in the live chat, and it's also in that playlist, what it allows you to do is it allows you to warm up with some easy questions and be focused on some easy questions related to the math no calculator section. Because think about, again, we want to be very aware of where we are in the test, what we're doing, what we're looking at. If you just start and you just go right into a math word problem, that is not very advantageous for you when in the 2 hours prior to starting that word problem, you've just been doing 2 hours of very, very dense, particularly in the reading section, very dense reading. And now all of a sudden the first question on the no calc is a word problem. That is not good. That is not advantageous to get that question right and to keep the momentum going. So that's where this 3-pass method allows you to warm up in a lot of ways prior to having to see any difficult questions related to math. And obviously that then carries over into section number 4 as well. So I highly encourage you guys to check out that video prior to your next exam, and especially if that's coming up, because that's a really easy way to implement some good thoughts and some good strategies, tricks, prior to your next test, especially if it's in the next couple days. Okay, but after the no calc section, then you'll get another, this one's a little bit more strict, a little bit shorter, another 5-minute break, and then you'll finish up with the final section, which is math with calc. Okay, the biggest thing that I can remind all of you of on the math sections is that the math sections are technically in order of difficulty. Okay, but I don't want you to think about it as one, right? So on the no calc section, section number 3, no calc, we have questions 1 through 15 are all multiple choice. Okay, and that's on the no calc section. Out of the 20 questions, 1 through 15 are multiple choice. And then questions 16 through 20 are free response. And the reason that I bring this up is because so many students get caught up with questions 11 through 15. I can't explain how many students get worried about questions 11 through 15. Okay, and the likewise on 26 through 30 on the calculator section. You guys, 11 through 15, these are in order of difficulty. Now, that's relatively speaking. It doesn't mean that all questions 11 through 15 are going to be difficult, but as a group, 11 through 15 are harder than 1 through 5. Okay, again, if you're just joining us, you haven't given a thumbs up below the video yet, give a thumbs up if that makes sense. 11 through 15 are harder than 1 through 5. So what does that mean? Well, and why am I bringing it up? Just like questions 1 through 15, 16 through 20, okay, are also in order of difficulty. So one thing that I can highly recommend and help you guys strategize with is the idea that once you get to question number 10, if you remember that these questions are becoming more difficult, why not jump, right? The moment, it doesn't mean that you can't answer any of questions 11 through 15, but why not jump to question 16, which is 6, right? 16 is going to be an easier question, and it's a free response question, so you can't guess on this, right? Because 16 starts the free response. If worst comes to worst, guys, right? If worst comes to worst, if you get questions 1 through 10 right, and then you get questions 16 through 20 right, because 20 is a free response difficult question, but so is 15, but 15 is multiple choice. If you get these 15 questions right, 15 out of 20, you could guess on 11 through 15, which you can't do on 16 through 20, or you can, but it's a 1 in a million that you get it right. 11 through 15 are all multiple choice. So if you go 15 out of 20 here, and then you guess on those final 5 difficult problems, rather than having to just leave questions blank on the free response because you never got to them, you can guess on these, probably pick up one, definitely pick up 1, let's call it 2 more questions, and now all of a sudden you're at 17 out of 20 because you didn't let questions 11 through 15 worry you. And that 3-pass video that I just posted is actually based on strategies from, algorithms in computer science. It really is. It explains it in the video. And in those algorithms, it's all about maximizing your efficiency. So that you're approaching this test, you know exactly where you are in terms of the formatting of the exam, so you never feel overwhelmed. You're always thinking, where's the next question that I know how to do? If it's a free response question, that's even better because I can't guess on it. I can't use my guessing technique. If it's not a free response question, right, what do I need to do? Either move on or find another easy one. Let me maximize my score. Okay, that's very, very critical. On the flip side, on the calculator section, let me just give you the breakdown of those ones as well. On the calculator section, right, you have questions 1 through 38. This is math. This is section number 4. Math with calc, which is basically just double the number of questions in every way from the no calc section. So you have questions 1 through 38. Questions 1 through 30 are all multiple choice, and generally speaking, in order of difficulty. Please don't say that, though, for every individual question. This is more about grouping, so like 1 through 5 is easier than right, 1 through 5 is, or rather 1 through 10 is easier than 11 through 20, which is easier as a group than 21 through 30, but you can find easy questions within any one of those brackets. So it's in order of difficulty as kind of a group of 10 maybe. And then you get 31 through 38, which are all free response questions. Free response. And once again, when you get to question number 21 through 30, or get to questions 21 through 30, these are difficult, right? We'll say difficult multiple choice questions. Difficult multiple choice questions. Why not try to do the difficult free response questions if they're going to be the same level, right? Level 3. Why not try to get to the free response questions where 31 maybe through 34 are all level 1 and 2 questions, level 1 or 2, okay? Get to those free response questions first, and then even 35 through 38, which are a little bit more difficult, might be level 2 and 3 questions, those are still all free response. So if you get all of those right, and you have to guess, even on these final 10, you're still sitting at 28 out of 38. You have 10 questions left to guess. You'll probably get 3 more of those right. Now all of a sudden, you have 31 out of 38, and you've gotten back to the easy questions found here on 31 through 34. Okay, again, very, very critical that we approach it in that way, that we're thoughtful and efficient in the way that we're taking this test, rather than just going in and saying, I got to do every question. We're thinking about your goal score. Don't think about your goal score. Think about the number of questions that you know how to answer. Think about the number of questions that you can answer correctly at any given time. And if you can't answer it, just move on. You can always come back to it. Sometimes even the reset of taking a step back and then coming back into the test or into that question makes it so much more clear, so much easier, but we're never going to get to that point. We're going to lose all of our momentum if we sit there just toiling away on that one question. And again, looking through those playlists for the reading, for the writing and language, for the math sections, you can find very helpful videos that describe these strategies in even further detail than what I've done today. And if you do those, and if you really are thoughtful and focused on those videos, you can implement a lot of these easy 10 points, right? If you watch every video and each of those helps you get 10 more points on the test, you know, by the end of this week even, or before your next exam, you can really look at improving by 100 points just by implementing these tiny little things that seem so minute. But if you implement 10 minute little details that help you with one question per section, right? That's all of a sudden 10 questions that you've now improved upon, and that again is somewhere between probably 80 and 100 points depending on where you are in the test or what your score is. All right, so again, all of that is very, very important, very critical that we're watching, that we're looking out for these things, and that we're putting ourselves in a position where we don't feel overwhelmed, we don't feel worried. Instead, we feel very encouraged by everything that we know about these exams and everything that we can do going forward. Because, hey, if I don't know how to do this one, let me find one that I do know how to do, that I can answer, that I do feel comfortable with. And if you guys can do that, that idea of staying positive, of keeping your momentum, I promise you, your scores will go up, whether that be this weekend or in your next test, right, going down the road. If you take 4 months to implement these things and to watch those videos and just improve a little bit every day, improve this much every day, if you improve this much every day, by the time the 4 months comes around, or 5 months, or whenever you're going to take it, that's suddenly a huge, massive improvement. And that's what we're going for, because those little thought processes, both before the test, in the test, and then while we're practicing for the test, the little tiny improvements over time become massive improvements. And it's so much easier to focus on one little concept than it is to focus on, well, if I don't get this score, I'm not getting into Harvard, I'm not getting into Stanford. That's way too stressful, way too overwhelming of a thought to be going into this test. Instead, think about how many questions do I need to answer on this particular section in order to reach the goal score that I set out for myself. And if it's 42 out of 52 for the reading section, if it's 15 out of 20 on the math no calculator section, then your only thought and goal should be, how do I find those 15 questions that I absolutely know how to do that's going to help me reach my goal score? And then you can think about the prospects of doing more questions after that. But until you've hit that number, there is no reason to stress about the 5 questions that are even more difficult, and in which case we're just going to skip those. We're going to move on, and we'll save those for our back pocket so that if we do have 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 minutes left at the end of the test, then we can start to address those more difficult questions, because we've already hit our goal number, and now we can turn our attention to something that might be, we've kept such high momentum that, hey, maybe I can get a couple of these questions right. And that's the key to being a great test taker. All right, guys, so that was a lot of talking. I'm tired. I'm a little out of breath. But I really hope that these videos are helpful for all of you. I really do. I hope that you guys can continue to improve. I hope that you guys continue to stay positive more than anything. This is such a small blip in your lives, right? It's just such a small thing, but it doesn't take away from the fact that your hard work and your preparation and your understanding of this exam form can really materially benefit you, because it does matter for scholarship money, because it does matter for college opportunities. It still does in a big way. And so if you guys are putting these little tiny approaches together and you're working hard each day to improve just a little bit, by the end of a certain amount of time, right, 4 months, that's a huge improvement. I can guarantee that. So again, I hope all of this was helpful. Please let us know if you have any questions going forward by just posting comments in the comments section. And then please make sure that you check out those different playlists, because I think the playlists themselves go in depth to pretty much everything that we were talking about today. And I tried to give you guys some individual videos that might be helpful as well. But again, in any case, I hope everybody continues to work hard. I hope you guys are all stay safe and continue to have a great week. If you have any questions, make sure that you comment those, and please try to follow along with the video as much as you can by downloading the test form, by downloading STARU and creating your student account. Otherwise, again, I hope you have a great rest of your day. Have a great week. Good luck on the test if you're taking it this week or next week or in the near future. And continue to work hard. I promise you this hard work will pay off in a massive way. So thanks, guys. Again, have a great week, and I'll see you guys soon. Thanks so much.